it's just a lot of fun being on your show, and I gave you my compliments before we got on the air. I love being on your show. We got so much information to pass on. There are a tremendous list of exciting developments going on right now. I mean, like global changes right now.
I agree. And thanks for coming on the show and allowing us to hear all the information that you've gathered and what you're going to give us. But I wanted to start off with what's happening with Deutsche Bank and the European banks. Let's start off there and work our way through everything else. Now, we know that Deutsche Bank, they've been laying off people. Deutsche Bank is in trouble. They've been downgraded. The Italian banks, they're in trouble. I mean, are we looking at a cascading event here where this whole thing is just going to eventually fall apart?
Hell yes. This is intertwined. This is ugly, and this is not fixable. We've got a situation now where Deutsche Bank is openly discussed as ready for a restructure breakup. And I don't think it's possible. When you do a breakup, you usually say, well, you got 7 parts and 2 of them are really badly impaired. We're going to find a new buyer for the 2 parts. We're going to restructure the debt for those 2 parts. You got 5 other viable systems, segments of the business. And we're going to go back and redo this and make the 7 all over again, and 2 are going to have a new face. That's not possible here. Deutsche Bank has about 7 parts and they're all dead. All of their business segments are dead. They're all insolvent, broke. They all have big, big negative values. Their stock is reflecting it. It's hit the single digits. And the voice who knows a little bit about Deutsche Bank told me several years ago. He said, watch Deutsche Bank, Jim. That is your meter. He told me this in about 2013, so 5 years ago. He said, Deutsche Bank is your meter. Deutsche Bank is going to die. They're going to keep it alive. The Euro Central Bank will keep it alive. They have to keep it alive because it's got a lot of derivative management there. It has almost as much derivative management as all of Wall Street. It's an outpost. And there's still, I noticed that even Dave, there was a news report about shareholder meeting and the CEO is under fire at Deutsche Bank, and they complained that they still have not gotten through the Bankers Trust acquisition that was forced down their throat by the Fed and Wall Street banks to create an unregulated, unwatched derivative outpost at Deutsche Bank. Okay, it's all coming apart. I've heard that there is the last remains of the Saudi gold that was not stolen in Switzerland under the guise of the phony criminality for UBS and Credit Suisse. Since when does the U.S. government have jurisdiction over Swiss banks? Okay, that was to steal Saudi gold, to take charge of the bullion banks operated by UBS, which was gigantic. The remaining unstolen Saudi gold was moved to Paris and then quickly shuttled over to Deutsche Bank. Why do you think Qatar, the big Qatar investment fund, why do you think they invested in Deutsche Bank? It was part of a deal. They got some gold at Deutsche Bank also, but the condition for keeping it safe under the Deutsche Bank roof for the Qataris was that they had to pitch in a couple billion to keep the stock alive, to keep the whole game going and the wheels turning inside Deutsche Bank. Okay, Deutsche Bank also owns, now I'm going to get to the big issue. They also own a good deal of Italian government debt. Now, if you look at a chart, even from, say, 2 years ago, you see that Germany had over $90 billion in Italian bank credit exposure. I'm not sure that includes Italian government bonds. Okay, so Germany's got a big swath of Italian debt. Who else does? I included this way back in July of 2016, put it on the public article 2 days ago, It's been posted out in numerous sites that back in July of 16, Germany had 92 billion in Italian bank credit exposure, but France had 3 times as much. We're going to see the Italian banking system collapse. They've already had runs, bank runs. That was a year ago. They've already had in Italy very serious bond haircuts. We've also seen creation of cocoa bonds, which are first in line to go to zero upon bank failure, or, go to 5 cents on the dollar upon near-death experiences. We've already seen that. You've already seen suicides in Italy from bank bond holders who were assured you're protected. They weren't. They lost. They killed themselves. Okay. The Italians are coming up with something called the mini bot. I don't know exactly how they got the name, but I think of it as a new sovereign currency for usage on paying large tax bills and government bills like, covering the deficit. Okay. So a very high level, elite form of currency. I think it's going to eventually get converted with a devaluation into a new lira. Okay, there are others who say, that can't happen. Well, a lot of things that can't happen have happened. Okay, when the Italians, who are facing severe political disruptions now, with defaults as part of the debate, as exiting the European Union as part of the debate, as creating a new currency as part of the debate, when this thing goes bad, when the big changes come about in Italy, when you do have tremendous structural disruptions with bank failures, it's not just Monte dei Paschi. It's like 4 or 5 banks. They're all dead. They're all just zombies. When this happens, you're going to see at least one German bank fail. And that's going to cause a contagion that will result in at least one other big German bank failing. And I think Deutsche Bank is the prime candidate for this trigger event. Commerce Bank is often mentioned, Commerce with a Z, in Germany. They've got just too much exposure. But, here's where it gets nasty and dangerous. You can look at Italy, which is the 3rd largest economy in Europe, in the European Union. You can look at Germany, which is tightly connected now. The woes from Italy are having reverberations in Germany. The Germans don't want a default of the Italian government debt. They've got 300 billion euros of bad paper in the Italian banks. I'm talking about apart from their trillion euros of government debt. When this all happens, you're going to see a 3rd country enter the picture as part of the contagion, and that is France. It's very little mentioned in the press that the Italian banks and the Italian debt and the German banks, that is the crux of the problem. But they don't mention what the collateral damage is certain to be, not possibly. It is certain to be for Societe Generale and BNP Paribas. And they got a 3rd big bank there. It's called Crédit Agricole in France. And I kind of doubt they're going to get slammed as much as Societe Generale and Paribas because Crédit Agricole is largely a farmer's bank. They need money to plant the seeds, so they're granted the money and pay back at the harvest time. Okay, I know that's oversimplified, but I think that's the core of their banks as opposed to derivative management. And for the biggest French participant in derivatives, it's Societe Generale, Societe Generale. Okay. My point is that France is going to be severely harmed when all this hits ground zero, and I just don't know how it's going to play out. I just know that Deutsche Bank's going down. Italian government debts, I think, are going to be restructured. And at the same time, numerous Italian banks are going to enter failure. And notice that the Euro Central Bank is trying to stand down. They're trying to get out of the way. The Germans are trying to dump Italian debt. So you got the two biggest bondholders, both of Italian banks and Italian government, trying to back down with Deutsche Bank and the Euro Central Bank. I guarantee you there are big, loud discussions and arguments going on between Deutsche Bank and the Euro Central Bank, where they're trying to urge Draghi at the Euro Central Bank to keep this thing going and don't dump. Instead, buy the bonds that Deutsche Bank doesn't want to hold anymore. And instead, the Euro Central Bank is also dumping the same types of bonds. So when the two biggest players holding up Italy are both dumping, I say it's just a countdown. Okay, that's Italy. And the big question is, can they exit the euro? Can they get out of the union, and can they get out of the euro currency? Now, I had a rather naive perspective a year and a half ago regarding Italy and the euro. I thought, well, they'll just get out. They'll create the lira again. They'll devalue it, and they'll get some economic stimulus from suddenly Italian wine, cheese, shoes, and clothes are 30% cheaper. There'll be a lot of buyers, even in Europe, even in the United States. There might be some buyers in China for those fine Italian products. They do have fine Italian products. But, it was naive, Dave. I learned some things. If the Italians back out and they reintroduce the devalued lira currency, and by the way, a lot of shops, stores, and restaurants everywhere in Italy have two different items on your bill, the euro and the lira. They never quit with the lira. So they kind of planned to go back all along from the start, probably because they knew that Goldman Sachs helped them to falsify their application to meet the Maastricht Treaty requirements for entry into the euro. What did Goldman Sachs help them do, Jim? Well, they changed a lot of the debt and made it look like a currency swap. And that's exactly the domain of expertise for Goldman Sachs. And they weren't the only country that did that. Spain did the same thing, also with Goldman Sachs. Why is Goldman Sachs not shut down as a RICO crime syndicate? Because they're running the U.S. government Treasury Department. Okay, this is all going to end. And when they do come up with a new currency, Dave, it means the euro has to be reformulated. They don't just continue with the other ones keeping stride. They have to have a meeting and create the new ratios and make a new agreement for the euro to continue. So Italy backing out means the euro stops until it's reformulated. That is a very big deal and a far cry from my original, somewhat naive understanding.
If Italy backs out, won't other countries look at this and say, okay, the UK is exiting, Italy is going to exit? Wouldn't Spain, France, and the rest say, something, why don't we exit too? Why stick with this?
Okay, I think the two countries that you cited are the critical ones, Spain and France. Let's look at each one separately. Very briefly with Spain. Pardon me. Spain has been doing a financial accounting gimmick ever since the pig's debt became a big issue in 2010. Okay, for 8 years they've been playing financial accounting games, not marking to market their bonds and mortgage bonds and credit portfolios all across their banking system. I'll give you an example. Home prices went down like 20%, yet on the books, they're not showing as underwater mortgages on credit portfolios within banks. Okay. Well, it means they got false accounting in the banks. Well, that's okay if the government says it's okay. All right. That's their problem. Well, Spain is starting to come out from that because shareholders are demanding proper accounting, and they're going to get their wish, and they're not going to like what they see. Okay, you're going to have some bank failures in Spain, and it's going to be a mess, and all this delayed from phony accounting is going to result in actual accounting and bank failures and big problems and bank restructures and a whole lot more. And amidst all that, I think they're going to want to go back to their peseta currency. Okay. In Mexico, they got the peso. All across Latin America, they got pesos. Even in Costa Rica, we got a currency called the colon, which is the name of Columbus. But the slang word for the colon here is the peso. How many pesos is that, Jim? Oh, you mean colon? Yeah, peso. Okay, the Spanish are going to go back. It's just a matter of time. And when they do, they're going to devalue and enjoy. The Spanish, just like the Italians, are going to go back to their original currencies, the peseta and the lira. They're going to devalue and enjoy a nice little boost from a devaluation. It's going to mean that they'll be able to suddenly compete better than the Dutch, than the French, than Luxembourg natives and businesses. Okay, the devaluation is going to be a stimulus. It's going to be a price discount. That's what currencies are. Price. Okay, that's Spain. And that, in addition to Italy, will force the reformulation of the euro currency. Okay, now France. Okay, when Italy experiences its financial crisis at a new level, at an accelerated contagion and breakdown, the Germans are going to have their problem, and the French banks will have their problem. The French did something a few years ago that was very clever. Very clever. After the EU rules came into place, all the new French debt got denominated in euros. And I'm told that as of about maybe a year ago or 10 months ago, something like 60% at that time, something like 60% of the French government debt was denominated still on the contracts and financial securities in the old French franc. It was not converted over. And the rebellious independent political parties of France are saying, let's go back to the old franc. We've got a substantial core of our debt. And remember, debt is regarded as wealth. It's upside down world. So the French are pointing to their old government debt bonds, their financial securities that they call assets, as being their wealth to pave the way toward a return to the old franc, which they will devalue. And their issue is converting the new government debt denominated in euro currency into the old franc currency. That'll all be handled in the restructure and the devaluation and new formulation of their French franc currency. So they provided a model for Italy. And Italy decided, well, we're just going to create this sovereign currency for the new debt, whereas the French made euro currency but separated the old debt. They're each going about it in their unique national way. Can France avoid the ruin from a Deutsche Bank failure in combination with an Italian banking system failure? I say, hell no. They got triple the debt that Germany has. And a little known fact, Dave, is that over 90% of the French government debt is held by German banks. So this is all interwoven with three countries, Germany, France, and Italy, the three biggest economies in Europe. Will that cause a global financial crisis? I say hell yes. I've been calling it the systemic Lehman event. Remember in 07 and 08, it was the mortgage bonds, the subprime bonds, the lousy underwriting, the no income qualifications, the ninja, what is it? No income job or investment. Oh my God. It's just incredible. The underwriting that went on in 06 and 07 behind mortgages. Oh, wait a minute. It all came back. We did it again. Wreck, rinse, repeat. That's the 3 R's for the United States. Build a bubble, let it bust. It goes into wreckage. Rinse it off with lots of TARP money, QE, and repeat. Wreck, rinse, repeat. That's the motto of American finance in the last 30 years. Since what big event, Jim? Since we exported, forfeited, and outsourced our industry.
So
go ahead.
Will this event that you're saying that it's going to come back to the U.S. with France, with Spain, Italy, and Germany, will this then destroy the dollar?
I think it will trigger events that bring about a sequence of locations of crisis. Hard to describe this. In math, we call it a locus, a locus of points. For instance, you might see mortgage bonds crash again in the United States. You might see 2 banks enter failure, and they're going to complain about it. Fed tightening did this. Fed tightening is part of a scuttle program, in my opinion. Let's start this process that breaks everything down. Okay, why do I call it a systemic Lehman event? This is to answer your question. Because before we had mortgage bonds that were subprime. Now we have sovereign bonds that are subprime. Why is Italy's government bond not still at 7, 8, and 9% like it was several years ago? Because the Euro Central Bank is buying it. The QE, hypermonetary inflation bond purchase program, spread to the Euro Central Bank. And they bought up Italian debt, Greek debt, Spanish debt, Portuguese debt. Without buying those debts, those bonds, all their bonds would have remained over 8%, and they would have had financial failure and debt default in all 4 PIGS countries. They didn't want that to happen because it would have taken down the German banks. It would have taken down Deutsche Bank, but Deutsche Bank is going down anyway. It all happened anyway. They just bought time. My point is that sovereign bonds, which are the nice, fancy way of saying official government bonds, like U.S. Treasuries, like French government bonds, like Italian government bonds, they're all subprime. They all have wretched fundamentals with huge deficits and undeserving low bond yields, primarily because of central banks buying them with printed money, funny money. It's not money. It's just stuff posing as money. It's paper with fancy letters and ink with a filament in it that makes it very hard to counterfeit, but not impossible. And if you want to know where the 2 largest centers for counterfeiting U.S. dollars, the answer is Iran and North Korea. And if you're thinking it's $100 bills, you're dead wrong. It's $20 bills. It's the standard that's used in supermarkets here. If I pull out a $20 bill in Costa Rica at a supermarket, I get no funny looks whatsoever. It's worth about 11,000 cologne. And it's right there on the receipt. Very easy to do. $20 bill is the standard. If my friends, and occasionally I do with my bank account back home in the United States, pull out, say, a few $100s at an ATM machine, it's always and never anything but $20 bills. So what we have now is not just a subprime mortgage bond problem. No, we made it an everything bond bubble. It's mortgage bonds, it's student loan bonds, it's tranches of automobile loans within asset-backed bonds. They're mortgage bonds with a car element. I like to say it's a mortgage bond in a car, driving down the road to ruin, the road to nowhere. Many sovereign government bonds are subprime. Since when does the U.S. Treasury bond, 10-year, deserve anywhere near 3%? When it's got $1.2 trillion in annual deficits and very few buyers at auctions that aren't with a Wall Street lapel or a U.S. Department of Treasury hidden disguise operating the Exchange Stabilization Fund. We don't have bond auction failures in the United States because the machines and Wall Street banks are right there in the room. Okay. We deserve in the United States for the Treasury a 10-year of anywhere between 8 and 15%. We deserve that. There are not adequate buyers. People wonder, well, gee, Jim, isn't the QE, isn't all that bond purchase program keeping it nice and safe and steady and stable and wonderful? I say, no. All it did was prevented a U.S. government bond default. All it did was prevented numerous Wall Street bank defaults. It provided the liquidity for the Wall Street banks and liquidity to fund through African and South American style debt monetization, the U.S. government debt. How do we finance the $1.2 trillion in annual government deficits for the U.S.? Printed money and machine-generated derivatives called interest rate swaps. If you want an education on that, sign up for Rob Kirby's newsletter. He explains it well. It's short-term bonds, coupon versus standard, versus long-term bonds, coupon versus standard, work the differential. And what they've done now with raising interest rates is to remove the free cost, the zero-cost input feeder system to the interest rate swap derivative. It's no longer free money on the low end and a bond purchase on the upper end. That's why you have a lot of games going on behind the scenes every time they raise interest rates at the Fed. The first time it was, well, let's dicker with the repo rate and cancel out the interest rate hike. The second time it was, well, let's rejigger the excess reserves from the banks and we'll kind of nullify the interest rate hike. Now what they're going to do is just stop the interest rate hikes before they explode the entire derivative machinery. My point is a systemic Lehman event involves entire banking systems and the big bond family called sovereign bonds. When Deutsche Bank and Italy blow, it'll carry over into France and it will extend to Wall Street. If it doesn't extend to London Banking Centre with Barclays and the rest, RBS, Royal Bank of Scotland, if it doesn't extend to England too, I'll be very, very surprised. That's why they're trying to prevent the Deutsche Bank failure. That's why they're trying to prevent the Italians from pulling the plug and starting anew outside the euro, both the political union and the monetary union. This is going to blow and they can't stop it. It's a matter of when it must happen from, ripped away devices that are holding it together for another month. The Deutsche Bank credit default swap has gone way up in value. It's the cost in percent for insuring standard type Deutsche Bank corporate bonds. The same signal was issued several months before Lehman Brothers failed. The Voice once asked me, before Lehman failed, we had just begun to get to know each other for several months. And he said, Jim, you're ahead of the pack. He said nice things to me. What are the three entities that are going to fail? And he named the September weekend that Lehman failed. I said, you're telling me in 5 weeks it's a big event to happen in mid-September next month? And he said, yes. What are the three entities that are going to fail? And I said, well, one's Lehman Brothers because its CDS swap is going way up in value, and that's insiders protecting their arses. And he said, well, you got one. I said, well, the other was Fannie Mae. Their stock is down 95%, and they don't have really, corporate bonds. So it's really the stock price is their meter for failure. And he said, okay, you got two. I said, I don't know what the third is. And he said, well, it's an insurance company. And I floundered and couldn't come up with it. And he said, that's okay, Jim. I've asked 10 people this week, and no one's even gotten one out of the three. You got two. So you're ahead of the pack. Okay, the Lehman Brothers hint was rising CDS, the bond default insurance. We're seeing it now in Deutsche Bank. It's going to go higher. Deutsche Bank's going to fail. They're going to do a restructure. I don't know what they're going to be able to pull together and save out of their various 7 or 8 business segments because they're all a mess. They're all deeply impaired. But this time around, it's not going to be a bunch of Wall Street banks arguing over aid to help them in managing their mortgage bonds. It's going to be several countries arguing on how do we keep this thing going with numerous sovereign bonds in failure along with their banking systems. And we've mentioned the site where this is going to happen, ground zero. Germany, France, Italy. Now, the irony here is that the German banking system is kind of solid. Their economy is very solid. They're still exporting. They still got surpluses. They're harmed by the Russian sanctions that the U.S. and EU Commission put on, but they're now rebelling. And so is France. France just signed a multi-billion-dollar group of contracts at the St. Pete Economic Forum in Russia a couple weeks ago. France and Russia in direct defiance of the Russian sanctions. It was a FU to Washington and Brussels. The Germans are doing the same. The U.S. is trying to stop the Germans with their Nord Stream 2 Gazprom connection for gas supply to industrial clients in Germany. The U.S. is not going to succeed. The Germans are the healthy player in this mess, and they're trying desperately to cut off Italy, to cut off Spain, to cut off Greece, and to cut off Portugal. And it's not going to be easy to do. They've got too much skin in the game. But whatever Germany has in the game, France has more. France is going down. Two of the three biggest banks are going to go down. So this time around, it's not about mortgage bonds and saving a segment within the financial system. Now it's saving the core nucleus of the financial system. And this is where I think we're going to see a lot of new developments, Dave. I'd like to transition to the U.S. dollar and the U.S. situation for this reset. The U.S. is going to get affected. It's not like the Wall Street banks have a bunch of Italian debt and they got a bunch of Deutsche Bank stock. No, that's not it at all. The connection with Wall Street is the derivatives that they shove down in bankers' trust, down the Deutsche Bank throat, with all the regulators watching and saying, you got to do it, you got to do it, you got to do it, you have no choice. Deutsche Bank derivatives are going to become a big story. They got something like 47 trillion in notional value in Deutsche Bank derivatives, and they're all interconnected with London and Wall Street. That's it. Think of it as a big pipeline for directing very powerful concentrated sulfuric acid into the offices. Sulfuric acid into the office. What does that do? Well, it melts down machinery, kills human bodies, and alters the form of paper. Okay, that's what's coming through the derivative pipeline. Many people call it the financial nuclear event. Well, that's what I consider part and parcel to the global currency reset, Dave. This will not happen without U.S. and London contagion.
So you're talking about this reset, and we see there are many countries out there in Africa just recently said, listen, we need to get away from the dollar. We need to go into the yuan. We see India dealing with Iran outside of the dollar. We see Russia and China, they're dealing outside of the dollar. And a lot of countries are repatriating their gold, Turkey, Germany, Hungary. And we see right now that all these countries are doing this. Are they preparing for this reset?
It's exactly what they're doing. First of all, they're playing the practical game of getting out of the way of U.S. sanctions and SWIFT bank-to-bank transactions in the dollar, getting out of the way, preparing themselves. It's like, okay, everybody, let's leave our main house. Let's go back to that little servant quarters that's 100 yards back in the woods a little bit, that's next to our private pond. Let's go build that up, and let's go install a propane gas tank cylinder, and let's fix the roof a bit, and let's put a freezer in there and move some food, because our main house is going to burn down. Okay, that's the preparation going on. Okay, when the U.S. I don't want to get into the whole Iran nuclear deal. That's for another day. It's a topic in itself. It's half an hour. But when the U.S. reneged on that treaty for various reasons having to do with scummy elements and private bribes and who knows what else, what the U.S. essentially did by putting back on the Iran sanctions was forcing Iran to strengthen its barter deals, like with China. All they did was they formalized the Import-Export Bank, loaded it up with Chinese funds, funded it in order to proceed with the import-export trade between China and Iran. Okay, they handled that well. Okay, the Russians stepped in and decided, okay, we're going to get you part, the Iranians, we're going to get you part of the Rosneft oil consortium. We're going to buy your oil. Even though we're the biggest producer, we're going to buy your oil. And I thought, okay, it's the same question. Venezuela, Saudi, and Iran. Why does Russia and Rosneft buy oil? They're a producer. They already sell. Why are they buying? It's to process and create the oil cartel. I call it the Russian Rosneft oil cartel. What's that all about? I'll get back to Iran in a minute. They control the oil supply from major producers. They therefore have the responsibility to manage the contaminant level and the viscosity, and they sell it all outside the dollar. And the countries that they buy it from don't have to deal with the entire issue of the U.S. coming down on their throats for selling oil outside the dollar. They sold oil to the Russians. And the Russians might gladly accept dollars, which they dump on the market. Okay, so the Russians are creating an oil cartel to fill the gap created by OPEC, which is a largely dead entity. You have a complete switch, a complete shift in OPEC. A few years ago, it was the OPEC Arab nations that honored the deals, and the fringe element like Nigeria, Angola, Venezuela, Mexico, those countries dishonored the deals. Now what you have is the fringe nations coming up with signing on deals to limit output, and the Arabs, which are all desperate monarchies from a financial fiscal standpoint, breaking the deals. It's a complete shift, 180 shift. And furthermore, those non-Arab OPEC members on the periphery, I point primarily to Angola and Nigeria. They're African and they're not small. They're dealing in RMB. The Chinese, I put this in the May report, the Chinese are lending treasury bonds to the Angolan government and being paid back in RMB because the Angolans are selling oil. Oh my gosh, the Chinese are very clever in how they're dumping dollars in treasury bonds. Okay, Iran is developing two main cords, the import-export funding with China and the Rosneft oil consortium with Russia. They're also creating pretty healthy deals with India. And Iran has earned the support on a continued basis with many European nations, which are saying, we're going to salvage the nuclear deal. We're going to continue with it. We're going to develop our ties with Iran commercially. We're going to honor our new contracts. And the only one that backed out so far is the globalist cabal corporation called French Total. Take a look at their board members and you probably find, buddies of Rothschild and the most tarnished of the globalist elites. Okay, they backed out and a Chinese energy company, CNPC, took over the French Total operations and they got a deal. Fine. Qatar has also got Chinese deals. Qatar is already selling oil and gas to China in RMB. So when the Saudis do it this month or next, they won't be the first. Qatar is the first. All these nations are working to set up non-dollar operations and trade and non-dollar, specifically gold, operations in their banking systems. I think we're going to see a torrent of U.S. Treasury bonds and Euro bonds and UK gilts sold by the Eastern nations in order to build up their gold reserves in the banking system. And almost the hilarious concomitant event, meaning same time, is that the European banks are going to load up on gold also and just not tell us about it. The European banks are going to follow the BIS Basel formula for exit from crisis and insolvency. I put in the Hat-Trick Letter newsletter a couple months ago, might have been March, a very nice piece about an interview from a very astute consulting group called For the Forest Through the Trees, FFTT. They had an interview of a fellow named, I think his name was Zijlstra, with a J in there, a Swiss fellow who was the board chairman of the Bank for International Settlements, Basel, often just called Basel. So the Basel board chairman shared his formula for how central banks get out of their mess, where they own too much as last resort, sovereign bonds that are deeply impaired. Now, just look at Euro Central Bank and the Federal Reserve, and you've got $9 trillion of sovereign bonds that I call subprime. They call them pristine AAA. But when you've got a $1 trillion deficit annually in the United States and almost no bond buyers showing up at auctions outside the country, and derivative reliance and QE reliance, I say your bond is subprime. So Zijlstra, the board chairman of Basel, said the way out is for the leading nations' central banks to load up on gold and lift the price tenfold. That way their books are remedied from all the bad paper impaired sovereign bonds. Now, that was in the 80s that Zylstra said that. Move to 2014, where, I can't think of his first name. His last name is White. Chief economist at Basel. His name is White. And he said, we've got a crisis. We've got the central banks now in Europe and the United States and elsewhere, all loaded up with impaired bonds. And the way out is for causing a financial crisis and then announcing late in the game that gold will be the solution, a return to the gold standard, and the major central banks will have loaded up with gold to enjoy the tenfold increase in price and therefore get themselves out of the insolvency jam. Okay, that's a solution in the West. The solution in the East is much different, where they simply move to gold payments and instruments related to that for trade. And that's why I think a very big trigger coming up is the Chinese are going to announce a gold trade note. There might be some Turkish participation in supply. I think the Turkish are going to have a participation in the BRICS gold platform that is taking shape now. And if you think the Turks don't know anything about gold, you're wrong. They got 1,000 years of history. Just take a look at the Ottoman Empire. Now, whether or not it failed, I think it failed economically and militarily because they outsourced their weapons development. Okay, that's a different story another day. The Turks know gold. I think the Turks might even enter the BRICS alliance. I mean, like BRICS with a T at the end. This is going to get very hairy because the East is going to pursue gold through trade and immediate conversion in banking reserves to gold bars from the lousy, impaired, what I call subprime major sovereign bonds like U.S. Treasuries and Euro bonds, while the West does a secretive game of fixing their balance sheet, fixing their insolvency by hidden gold accumulation. And it's going to get very exciting because a lot of insiders are going to start moving big amounts of money while the COMEX breaks. Now, I don't have a forecast of when the COMEX is going to break, Dave, but I'm hearing a number of rumbles from 2 or 3 different places that they just cannot handle any longer the paper games inside the COMEX. So things are breaking. It's very timely, like, Deutsche Bank and Italian banking system. Very timely. I'm excited by developments, and I'm just absolutely convinced we're going to see a gold price 10 times higher. Now, I get some naysayers and say, well, Jim, before we get 10 times higher, don't we have to get to 2,000 first? And I say, yes, we do. And I think things are going to move very, very quickly. And I'm hearing also, a couple of my best sources are confirming this. The breakout's not going to happen with gold. It's going to happen with silver. And then maybe silver will be pulled back, and then you have the big gold event, and then all the political and the central banking and the currency policies change. And then silver just pauses a while, and then silver goes up 20-fold. That's kind of how I think it's going to play out. But, that's a very rough script, Dave.
Jim, let me ask you, you're talking about these nations and central banks accumulating gold. We know Russia and China, they accumulated a lot of gold. And it sounds like they're, getting their gold back and they're preparing for a reset. What about the U.S.? You did mention something about some type of secret gold or something like that. I mean, we know that Mnuchin was, in Fort Knox, he held up a gold bar proving that we do have gold. But do we have enough gold to weather this reset that is coming?
Oh, boy. Very, very tough questions. What Mnuchin held up was a tungsten bar with gold plating. Now, back in the Clinton administration, up to the year 2000, there was a massive project underway to convert just about all, not all, but just about all the central bank gold at the Fed, convert it to tungsten bars. I know this sounds outrageous, but, the Clintons and the Bushes are probably the grandest criminals in the history of the United States. They're both presidents. I call them the narco presidents. It's Papa Bush, Clinton, Baby Bush, and Obama. They're all narcotics presidents. The narco presidency and the lineage. Trump interrupts that. So that's why they hate him and go after him so vigorously and criminally. I mean, they're using criminal methods to attack him. Falsify a dossier with Russia and all that crap. It's just ridiculously silly stuff. But the Clinton gang with Robert Rubin and Papa Bush converted, I'm told that it was like over 1 million 400-ounce bars. We're talking about like 30, 40-pound bars. 1 million bars were recast and converted to tungsten. Now, I got more of this story. It's Eberhard Refinery in Western Canada, but I got more of the story from a Canadian contact who said, Jim, there's a piece to this that fits in like a glove. And that is, there was a giant tungsten deposit very near the Eberhard Refinery. So they produced the tungsten nearby, very low transport cost, moved it to the Eberhard refineries where it was operating 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, and 360 some days per year for a couple of years. And how did they ship all this fake gold out? Well, through the Bush-Clinton narcotics route from Mena, Arkansas base to Panama, which is largely concentration center for banking. Okay, what country was the biggest victim of this tungsten gold? The answer is Hong Kong. China bought a tremendous amount, but Hong Kong was, I think, the biggest victim for the bank fraud. And there's some very astute financial analysts who've helped me to become aware. But if you look at the Department of Commerce quarterly reports, you'll see in them a line item called industrial supplies and materials. And it's got a couple billion every single month sent out to Hong Kong. I think it's restitution. They cut a deal. Hong Kong bankers keep quiet. Don't talk about the Bush, Rubin, Clinton crime scene. And it gets fixed. But the country that did not get fixed was China. And here's just a little sideline story. But China got robbed. They did a gold lease and they didn't get it back. Wall Street just reneged. It was part of the 2000 conversion of handing back Hong Kong to the Chinese as a no longer British colony. Okay, I'm mixing stories here, but it's about gold shipment fraud. The first story was about Bush, Rubin, Clinton shipping 1.3 million bars of gold. We're talking about numerous aircraft loads. They stole the $600 billion of Fort Knox. Bush, Clinton, Rubin stole Fort Knox, $600 billion in gold. That needs to be addressed. And it is being addressed. But let me just quickly finish the sideline story. The Chinese leased a bunch of gold to Wall Street because Wall Street wanted to use someone else's gold It's like, borrow someone else's money to build your housing portfolio as a wealthy magnate. Okay, fine. Wall Street wanted to use Chinese gold to keep the dollar game going in the 2000 decade, and they did, but they reneged in 2005 and 6, reneged on the repayment of gold, repatriation of gold to China. So China announced, we're going to focus on treasury bonds. Okay, read between the lines. We're going to sell Fannie Mae bonds. That was 2005. So what precipitated the Fannie Mae and Lehman Brothers subprime bond failure in 2007, but none other than the Chinese dumping Fannie Mae bonds? Never in the news. Okay, back to the U.S. Trump is trying to recover the roughly 8,000 tons of gold that were stolen from Fort Knox. And the routes for the crime scene, the getaway routes, are through the Philippines and Marcos and UBS. Okay, remember the UBS had a fake crime scene story, and the U.S. came in and controlled it with the tax dodging U.S. accounts in UBS, and oh boy, Iran sanction violations with Credit Suisse. They come up with their reasons. U.S. came in, they stole the Arab gold. Okay, in UBS, fine. But there's another side to this, and that is the U.S. shipped its real gold to Philippines, where it mysteriously was sent off using Continental Energy Corporation as a cover, just a shell corporation. There's no energy produced at Continental Energy Corporation that I know of. Help me to understand. Okay, that was to ship all the gold from the Philippines, which was stolen from Fort Knox, ship the gold, the real gold, from the Philippines to the banker cabal, to the Basel globalists, the Clinton, Bush, Rubin, criminals, facilitated the deal to steal the gold. And apparently, Trump has recovered it. That's exciting. So apparently, Trump has recovered the real Fort Knox gold. Okay, before anybody gets all excited that the U.S. is going to go back to the gold-backed dollar with a gold standard in banking and currency and all that, let me remind of 3 massive challenges that must be done in order to bring about that wonderful result. First is the $21 trillion of debt must be paid off for the U.S. government. As a sideline story, there's 20-something trillion missing from U.S. government coffers. And the primary crime scenes are the Pentagon and Housing and Human Services, which is basically Fannie Mae. Okay, so the U.S. debt has to be paid off. Okay, until we pay it off, we're stuck with interest payments. We're stuck with the reality of being deeply in debt. The second problem and challenge is there must be gold to back up a gold-backed dollar. And that's not easily done. So we need to source something on the order of 10,000. This is for round figures. It's called 10,000 tons of gold. We need to find it. We need to source it, and we need to put it in a safe place, and we need to make sure that some assholes don't come in there and steal it with Wall Street lapels. Third challenge, in order to bring about a gold standard, gold dollar, etc., is we need to get rid and draw down and remove and eliminate the trade deficit, which stands somewhere on the order of $600 billion this year. It'll be bigger than last year, which was 560. I like to put the trade deficit in perspective with relation to the other 2 points. If we have a gold-backed dollar and we have a $500 and something billion trade deficit, our trading partners who hold our imbalance, who hold our deficit, can legitimately request the gold. at a $1,300 gold price, that is 13,000 tons of gold. So if we have 10,000 tons of gold backing our dollar, we lose it in less than 1 year. Okay, which means we can't do it. We can't execute the gold standard plan for the dollar in banking. Some naively, I think, like simpletons say, but Jim, you don't understand. We're a big oil producer. We got the strategic oil reserve. To which I tell them, have you ever done a calculation on what its value is? Or did you just stupidly assume, like most American financial observers, that it's all good? They say, no, I haven't calculated. I say, I have. It's worth $8 billion. So if we go to the gold standard and we say, no, we're not going to forfeit our gold, but we're willing to forfeit our energy reserves, well, we can start with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and say, well, we need 80 of them. We need 70 of them in just the first year. So we lose 70 times our Strategic Petroleum Reserve in just the first year. Therefore, we cannot do it. I heard as part of this gold recovery and the Wanta controversy being settled, it's being worked out now. It's just extraordinarily difficult and reveals the criminality of Bush, Clinton, Rubin, Paulson, former Goldman Sachs CEO, and all the misdeeds involved with that. And they didn't steal the funds. They hijacked them to steal the interest. They did steal money, but they stole the interest. Well, it's kind of like, you're going to kidnap a person, and you're not going to kill him, but you're going to steal his organs. And if a woman has a baby, you're going to put that baby into sex slavery. So you're stealing everything about the person, but you're not killing the person. That's what they've done. And I'm told that one of the key projects after the release of the gold and the recovery of Wall Street's stolen gold by Wall Street, the recovery of the Fort Knox stolen gold, where the thieves were Langley and Wall Street. This is not just Wall Street banks. It's Langley. Langley's a gigantic crime center, and their funding is narcotics. Afghanistan. Huge, huge, huge. I'm told the major project, Dave, is a coast-to-coast network of maglev high-speed railways. And man, oh man, does the United States need that. I think they should start with some, advanced railways just to fix Southern California. What an impressive bunch of parking lots. Interstate highway system they have in Southern California. Parking lots. Nice clover leaves. Move along at 3 miles an hour. Thanks, Mr. Rockefeller. Mission accomplished. Complete dependence on fossil fuel, gasoline and diesel. Meanwhile, China, I've got two friends who visited China, Dave, in just the last couple of years. They both came back unbelievably impressed with the railway system, intercity and within city. You go to a big rail center and you got 10 trains connecting 10 cities. And you move out, and before you know it, you got over 150 miles an hour. Where can you do that in the United States? So we're the most envied nation in the world? I don't think so. Certainly not from a transportation standpoint. So the big project for getting the U.S. back in line, and I'm all in favor of this, is a network of coast-to-coast maglev high-speed railways. Now, I don't know if that's just going to be passenger or maybe it'd be lower speed with some freight, to move products. But the United States needs to improve its distribution system, both of people and products. And, Trump to his credit, talked about a $1 trillion infrastructure set of projects on his campaign in 2016. And he's never talked about it since. I think because there are a number of reasons for this. You could get cynical and say, well, you got bought out by the Wall Street bankers. You got bought out by the bad element, warmonger, military complex. Okay, fine. And evidence was the increase in the military budget. Fine. Evidence was not pursuing the Wall Street bankers for criminality. Fine. I understand all that. But what you could point to instead was he did an immediate audit and found out the United States did not have any gold, that it was all stolen by Bush, Clinton, Rubin. And he began finding the trails. Began going to Philippines and Indonesia. And he entered the war. I mean the gold war, where they shoot down planes that are moving gold and come up with a ridiculous story as cover. I'm talking about tracking the gold, tracking the assets, tracking the criminality of the players, and having sealed indictments of those players, tying it together with the omnibus bill for freezing elite assets. And it's taken Trump a lot longer than he thought. I think it's going to take him most of his four years in the first term. Okay, we're now a year and a half into the Trump presidency, the first term. I don't know how long it's going to be before serious progress is made for recovering the stolen gold of Fort Knox, for announcing who the criminals were, for recovering assets through RICO seizure that could include Disney World. I'm talking about very serious deeds as part of the cleanup process. He calls it cleaning the swamp, draining the swamp, whatever. Fine, it's all the same thing. It's recovering the stolen wealth from the United States. Imagine an individual company like IBM saying, someone stole our entire treasury asset. There'd be an uproar. But when it's for the United States, there's no talk. The entire Fort Knox was stolen. The primary victims were China and Hong Kong. The movement was to Philippines. The complicit agent was UBS. This is very dirty, very messy, and Trump has let internal word come out that they've recovered the gold. He's let internal word come out that with the asset seizures, they're on track for paying off the U.S. government debt. So they got the debt covered. They got, supposedly, they've got the gold discovered, supposedly. Well, they need the third element from my list for U.S. dollar gold backing to be satisfied, and that is elimination of the trade deficit. And we have not even begun. My point made, if I'm the economics advisor and I'm in charge of policy at U.S. government, be a nice job to have, but the trouble is I get shot in 1 month for making good policy that wasn't in conformity with the crime syndicates. My policy would be 30,000 new businesses sitting atop the individual state free trade zones with an emphasis of 30% export to alleviate the trade deficit, and incentives for these 30,000 businesses of suspension of corporate tax and suspension of property tax for a given period of time, and usually it's 3 to 5 years. That would be my plan, Dave. We can't do this without eliminating the trade deficit, because if we don't, in the first year, we lose 13,000 tons of gold. Now, some people say, Jim, it wouldn't be 13,000 tons of gold if the gold price is suddenly at, say, 2,500. I say, okay, Whenever I say 1 year, make it 2 years. We can't do it for the same reason. We're not going to forfeit 13,000 tons in 2 years from a trade deficit that's not addressed simply because we don't reindustrialize. You can double the gold price. It just doubles the period of time where we lose 13,000 tons of gold. But Jim, it might be 10 times. Okay, fine. And maybe we'll lose 1/10. Maybe we'll lose 1,300 tons of gold. But we're nowhere near announcing a 10 times higher gold price. And until and unless I hear of significant central bank accumulation of gold, I'm not going to believe it. I don't think we're ready for the event. And the gold brokers that I know of, like The Voice, do not mention anything about central bank accumulation of gold on a gigantic level. I don't hear anything about that. Maybe that's something that they wouldn't tell me about. But if that were the case, I think we would hear a lot more stories about gold shortage than we do. We do hear about some gold shortages. And, I really don't like even the argument. People tell me, but Jim, the dealer shows that they still have gold coins. I said, yeah, but they're not gold bars. They're not 400-ounce gold bars that are worth millions. What you're getting is floor scrap gold coins. Oh, yeah, Jim, but the mint's still making gold eagles. I said, yeah, from gold scraps. Oh, boy, Dave, these are exciting topics.
Jim, I just wanted to go back to paying off the debt. And you mentioned, and I think what you were saying is that stolen 20 trillion or the missing 20 trillion that was missing from the Pentagon. Are you saying that is what they're going to use to pay back the...
No.
Okay.
No. The Pentagon doesn't have a $20 trillion missing money accounting statement. At 9/11, the day before 9/11, Rumsfeld announced there was 2.3 trillion missing from Pentagon appropriations. In other words, the books don't balance and there's a missing 2.3 trillion at the Pentagon and nobody's looking for it. When nobody's looking for it, it means the people in charge stole it. Okay, fast forward to 2016, and the Pentagon bill had moved up from the crime scene from 2.3 trillion to 6.5 trillion. That was 2 years ago. Now, a Michigan State professor who probably will find himself dead before long for, snooping around where he shouldn't go, examined 6 departments at the U.S. government, starting with the Pentagon, then Human Health, HHS, Health and Human Services, and other departments like the Treasury Department. And he came up, before he was finished with all 20 departments, he'd only finished 6, and he arrived at 20 trillion missing, stolen money from fraud or what, I don't know, embezzlement, fraud, theft, whatever. Call it whatever you want. 20 trillion. Okay, one third of that is from the Pentagon. Okay. That money is not even being searched for. Okay, when I say that there's 20 trillion that Trump believes he's got covered, I'm saying it's from the sealed indictments of elite players, individuals, and their companies. That might include some banks. I'm hearing that there are some banks in this list. They're banks without a proper license and authenticity. They're just kind of rogue banks working for the globalists. Okay, that's on the list of targets for Trump. He's got so many very powerful targets that he's pursuing that he's in danger. I'm not talking about CNN. I'm talking about, real people. Okay, if you add together all the elite wealth, the owners for which have sealed indictments, Trump is claiming that that's over 20 trillion. That's the funds. And if you ask me, well, what are these indictments over? What are they about? It's about large-scale thefts. It's about pedophile, child sex ring, satanic sacrifice killing of children and the operators. Now, you had some important resignations in the Congress in the last year without adequate explanation of their resignations and withdrawal from political life. You also had some significant executive resignations. I don't want to mention names or companies, but there are several of them. I'm told they're all involved with the sex child killing rings. I don't like the word pedophilia. I was telling Dave before the show started with the recording that pedophilia makes it sound like, Uncle Tommy likes to stick his hands in little Susan's panties, and little Susan's only 6 years old. No, we're talking about something much, much more devious and heinous. It's underage child sex rings, sex slavery, and child murder with satanic ritual sacrifices. That's what the press calls pedophilia. It's a lot more than Uncle Tommy with his hands in little 6-year-old Susie's underpants. Okay? It's killing. It's producing adrenaline rushes from little children who are scared, mindless, witless. So adrenaline is in their blood when they mix it with wine at their rituals. And then they put the little dead bodies in unmarked graves. And they came from orphanages where they're called runaways. And the states call them closed cases. I'm sickened by this. I have a very unusual request, Dave. Are you still there?
Yes.
Yes. I have a very strange request that the Christians out there who have their own, this is an emotional point for me, who have their own prayer groups and people of strong faith, I wish they'd pray for me. I feel I'm under attack. I mean my personal life. 2 years ago, some things started to unwind. I'm talking about, I don't want to get into details. Things started to unwind and painful things for me. Costs, relationships, etc. Death. And I believe that I'm the object of some satanic, I don't like the word spell because it makes it sound like a silly game for kids play. I think I'm the object of something satanic to harm me. I've been on a mission. I've been bold. I've been talking about narcotics. And since about a year and a half ago, I've been starting to talk about the satanic element in bankers, in Wall Street, in Langley, in energy firms. I had a client tell me, Jim, I live in Alberta, and there's several energy firms out here, and I had a 7 a.m. presentation, and I came in early. No, I had an 8 a.m. presentation. I came in early at 7. I wanted to get my ducks lined up. I wanted to get my presentation lined up because it was for a funding project that I wanted to get involved in. And I said, does this have to do with the Alberta oil sands? He said, it's all the same thing. It's all related. They're all interrelated with funding, etc. And I heard noises at the end of the hall. And this was 7 in the morning. And I went in there. I just stuck my head in there. And the CEO was wearing a black robe with red trim. And they had candles. And they had 3 or 4 others. And they had dirge-like satanic music. And this was the CEO that I was trying to get multi-million-dollar funding for my small energy project. He said, Jim, if there's nothing else in my message, It is the energy industry at the top is loaded with Satanists. And I said, okay, well, Rockefeller's not the only one. He's got his, friends in line, and probably arranged for his friends to make acquisitions so that they're all one big happy family working in the energy industry. And he wrote back and said, yeah, ditto the big pharma industry too. I said, yeah, I know. Okay, so I'm asking people out there to use your Christian faith to help build a shield. And I hope you don't edit this out, Dave.
I won't. Go ahead.
I solicited from college friends 2 weeks ago, strong Christian college friends, contact in Costa Rica, and I completed the contact. And I'm trying to build a group of Christian warriors. Because when a certain client was killed recently, I'm just wondering if it's all connected. And when a certain friend experienced a near-death experience a couple of years ago, I'm wondering if it's all connected. I want to build my Christian faith and my Christian warrior prayer shield. There are a lot of Christians out there. Some of them are quiet in their faith. Some of them are very open in their faith. I'm asking you to help to pray for my Christian shield, because I'm a warrior and I put myself at risk. And to be honest, I'm not sure I'm going to get out of this in the next few years. Now, the voice might hear this and get upset at me, and I'm saying, my man, my sir, this is my life. I need help. I need protection. And this is one way I'm going about doing it. I don't know how often I'm going to make this kind of appeal, but I feel an affinity with you, Dave, and I feel like you've got a strong platform. There's certain guys who I think as a host would not take me seriously. I think you do. I knew a number of Christians when I was in college. I only went to a few, Bible studies. I backed out. I went the drug route. I went to marijuana parties. I got in trouble with that, and I straightened my life out in '87. The end of April this year, end of April, I had my 31 anniversary. 31 years of being outside that entire world of drugs and stupidity and insanity and wreckage. I could have been a very fine university professor. Pardon me, professor, like my father. My father's in literature. I'm in statistics. I could have been a great professor. I'm told all the time you explain things well. You're good teaching seminars in the company. I've done 100 seminars in companies. But I went the drug route. I got clean. I continued with my work. I was very grateful to my employer for their employee assistance program. EAPs are very standard in big companies now. April of '87, I went to rehab in Spofford Hall, New Hampshire. It was an exciting time. I came out. I pursued my faith a little more deeply, made a number of Christian friends. Some of them I have kept to this day after '88. But my college friend I appealed to because he's involved in a church with his wife in a role. I don't want to mention names or states or anything. They're just strong, and they help me, and I've got now a small group forming, and it's exciting. It's uplifting. It's like a breath of fresh air, and I just say to my closest friends here, we're going to think positively in the power of Jesus to stop these Satanists. They're incredibly entrenched. They're super wealthy. They control the press networks. They control the energy companies. They control big pharma. They control Wall Street banks. They control much more than that. They control Monsanto. They control Halliburton. They're trying to wreck the earth, as they like to say, to make hell on earth in Satan's service. Now, I went out on a limb there, Dave. I don't have much more to say. I've got my little stone duck. I got my little peluche, a little raccoon on the wall, and I've got my faith. And I want to get out of this reset and the aftermath. I want to get out of this in one piece. I've helped a lot of people. I've awakened a lot of people. I got a gift 2 years ago from a client that shocked me to my core. It was a big batch of silver coins because he said, Jim, you helped me to save my entire financial structure, and I went the right route, and it's going to be safe. I've sold my share of a company that I helped found, and this is my gift to you. A gift. Pretty sure he's a Christian too. I don't talk about my faith much, but I got saved from a world of drugs in '87. It messed up my career, messed up my family, messed up my marriage, messed up my finances. And I like to think they actually told me in rehab, it was an interesting day that day in group therapy. It was a very smart group therapy leader. She said, Jim, have you ever thought that you could have had a very successful and outstanding career as a mathematics, statistics professor in a fine university? I said, I hadn't thought about that. Thank you for making me aware. I'm not a publishing scholar in statistics. I'm a publishing analyst in gold and finance and economics. So my dad makes fun of me at times and said, Jim, well, you don't really have a resume of publications because it's just in gold. What would you say to that, Dave?
I say I appreciate everything you've done, and I appreciate your work, and I appreciate what you've been doing, and I love your work and your interviews and your letters, and I followed you from the very, going way back. I listened to you, and I was happy to have you just come on the spotlight and actually be a guest. So I want to say thank you, and I appreciate it. Well,
I appreciate the kind words and compliments. My main question, though, was, do you think publications in the gold journals, the online gold journal, do you think that qualifies as a resume item?
I absolutely do. Absolutely.
What I do is I put it on my resume, but I put the Gold Eagle and the Gold Seek index of my articles as the resume item, whereas my father, I'm not making this up. My father with his literature, my father has 20 pages stapled to his resume of his official publications with fine elite journals. I don't have anything in the Journal of American Statistical Association, JASA. My professors did and do from Carnegie Mellon. I've got one publication of my thesis. It's in the Journal of Applied Probability in England, and it's co-written by me and my Carnegie Mellon thesis advisor, my PhD counselor. And I'll be eternally grateful to him. And I keep in touch, but not much in the last few years. He actually retired recently. And he said, Jim, if it weren't for my father's million in, a couple million in inheritance, I probably would keep going. But, I think I'm just going to do a little consulting and no more work at the university in faculty work, teaching, coursework. No more PhD and master's thesis work. no more course teaching. He said, I just want to continue with a little bit of the research I had, some exciting area. He was trying to model the human brain from a stochastic process state function transition framework. Very interesting. I thought, my gosh, that sounds like a very difficult task. And he said, well, I got lots of data. I said, I think you probably got more data than you got models that have been proven to be correct and predictive. He said, well, you got that right, Jim. But, I could have been a university professor like my dad. My dad's in the who's who. And he's not real proud of me for my work because he calls me unpatriotic, Dave. We're getting, kind of personal here, but this is real. This is real. When you're a gold analyst, finance economics, you put yourself on the line. When you expose the corruption with the dollar and banking and economic false statistics, you put yourself on the line. And when I went in college and got diverted into the alternative world of hippies, I even went to some Northern Vermont Grateful Dead hippie conference fairs. What is it called? The Bread and Circus, I think. No, yeah, I think Bread and Circus. Anyway, very, very fun. Lots of weed. Everything's got. But I was. This was the late '80s, and I was drug free. I was like three years drug free. I didn't take anything. I went there, had a good time, and drank apple cider and bought things and watched the shows and listened to the music. I like Grateful Dead. They're not my favorite, but I like Grateful Dead. But I could have been a university professor. And then I might have had my opinion solicited on an economic standpoint for the legitimacy of gold, and I would have had a university behind me, and I would have been possibly fired. Like the Brigham Young University professor did when he, as a civil engineering professor, talked about how the World Trade Center went down from demolition. He was immediately fired. Brigham Young University, nice, reputable university, fired a man for telling the truth about a major mass crime. But now you got a replacement. That was the something 500 BY5. I can't remember anyway. Now you got the AE 1000, Architects and Engineers 1000, and you have 9/11 for Truth. So these groups have formed that are big and can't be stopped to talk about 9/11. The first 2 death threats I got were over 9/11. I wrote an article in 2005 called Iraq, Oil, and Gold, where I talked about the Nazi playbook and how it was executed with the World Trade Center taken down, the invisible army, the whole bit. I got a death threat from a Swiss banker. And then at a Munich, Germany conference, I got a death threat from U.S. Homeland Security. So I decided on exactly what I would not talk about. And now I'm wondering, Dave, if satanic bankers and child sex ring killers, I'm wondering if that's a topic I should really leave alone so that I am not the object of their rituals.
I mean, that's going to be a decision for you to make, if you want to pursue it or not. I mean, again, there's always a chance that these topics, hit a sour note with certain individuals and they will come after you. And some, they're at high levels, and if you're continually talking about it, they will shut you down one way or another.
Yeah, the only evidence I have, no computer viruses. The only evidence I have is Chase credit cards, Chase Bank, as in Chase Manhattan, JP Morgan. Chase credit cards cannot be used to buy a hat trick letter subscription.
Wow.
I've had numerous Chase attempts. It's about 10, and it's all in the last 3 or 4 years. I always tell the client, well, just use another card. You have a non-New York, non-Wall Street bank card? Oh, yeah, I've got 3. I'll try one of the other ones, and then I've got a subscription. But something happened in, I think it was around February or so. I had a client in New York State said, I've got a Chase account, and I'm trying to make an order. What do I need to do? Can you unlock something to make my order go through? And I said, no, just don't even bother with the Chase card. Do you have another card? And she said, well, it's a tiny credit union I'd rather not use. And I said, well, okay, what do you want to do? And she said, well, I could do Western Union or I could do something else. And we did something else. And she said, just to make sure everything's coochie coo, I'll make it 2 years. So she made a 2-year subscription, got me the money. I found a way through a friend, and that's what I had to do because of Chase. But, I got a couple other clients who say, Jim, I use my Bank of America card. That's not a problem. I said, okay, but that's not really Wall Street. It's Bush, but not Wall Street. I got another client who says, Jim, I used a Citibank card and no problem with that. And I said, okay, good. So maybe it's just Chase, because of all the banks that I pick on, I think JP Morgan's probably the number one I pick on. I revealed how JP Morgan went bankrupt and sold their headquarters to Chinese property conglomerate. I let it be known how I figured out with Rob Kirby how the Chinese took over the headquarters complex for JP Morgan and probably had an IRS income tax mega bond. It was part of the collateral to securitize the gold lease that we reneged upon. And as a result, JP Morgan lost its headquarters to the Chinese. So I pick on JP Morgan more than the others. Goldman Sachs is disgusting. I pick on them also, but probably ranked number 2. It's interesting. I think I'm going to tone back on the Satanist stuff, to tell you the truth. But I'm just going to say deep criminality, and if you want to read further, read about their pedophilia, and go a couple layers deeper. To I mean, QAnon has been very popular out there in the alt media. QAnon has warned that the revelations are going to shock the nation to its core.
Yeah, that is true.
And he or she actually said, there's controversy whether it's a woman working in the intelligence agencies, but he or she said, QAnon said, it's going to be a whole lot deeper than people expect. It's a whole lot deeper than simple child molestation, as I said, and it's going to involve a lot bigger cross-section of our leadership. And QAnon actually said probably a good 30 to 40% will not believe it because it's so ugly and so deep and so heinous. I think Hugh Hefner of Playboy was killed by these people. I think he did not say, well, I've got sex and cocaine parties with elite on film, and I'm going to be, using it for extortion and whatever. No, I don't think that's what Hefner did. I think Hefner just let it be known that he had a library. And they killed him to take control of the library through the lawyers. If you want a massive crime scene to take advantage of, you got to kill somebody.
True.
And from what I've heard, Hefner had at least 20 very powerful people on film. I mean, like in the sex act, maybe with minors, with booze and drugs, and lots of exposure. So he had to go. And, the BS story is he heart failure. He was old. He was in his 80s. Well, yeah, fine. My dad's 98. When he was in his 80s, he didn't croak. My dad's 98. Well, it's fantastic, but if you ask him, he'd say, well, Jim, it takes me 5 minutes to get out of a chair, so it's not so fantastic.
Want to tell people how to get in touch with your newsletter and how to access your site and stuff?
Yeah, let's just keep it brief. I don't want to go on about final elements. It's www.goldenjackass.com. Started in April of 2004. I'm looking at month number 170 that was just finished in May. We're now in month 171. It has a free web page, pardon me, called the public domain web page. On it, you find interviews and public articles. Just had a public article this week about trigger events. I think it's very interesting. You can identify now some potential trigger events toward releasing the gold price and advancing the gold standard. And it involves, Deutsche Bank and Italy as primary events as a trigger. But I don't do interviews on a second repeated basis unless a link is provided, which means I tend to get a series of interviews with links if they do well. And Michael Pinto, if you're listening, I'd like to be on your show again. Just thought I'd throw that out. There's also the newsletter. These interviews and public articles have two purposes. One is certainly a public mission. I don't like the word education, but it's a public mission to inform about what's going on because the major press is full of lies. I like to say it's 80% full of lies, whereas the alternative press is 80% truth. Okay. On the website, goldenjackass.com, there's a newsletter. And it's on the proprietary members area. It's only accessible through a password and username. So sign up for the newsletter. Bounce around, pick up some speed and sign up for the newsletter. I like to mention my three favorite compliments because now it's three. I was away from your newsletter for a couple of years and I got back and I wish I'd never left. That's one. The second one is I've been relying on your free podcasts and interviews for the last 2 or 3 years, but out of curiosity, a couple months ago, I signed up for your newsletter. I wish I had done so long ago. This is extremely interesting, and you tie it together. Here's my third favorite compliment. I canceled just 6 weeks ago, and you teased me with giving me an email that your May report is posted and my password doesn't work. I'm not sure I can live without your newsletter, so I'm going to sign up again. You do great work. Whoa. 3 compliments. Reversing a cancellation that was recent. And I just had something that's never happened to me before. When people lose a job and they say really nice things about the newsletter upon cancellation, I give them a couple extra months. Doesn't cost me a dime. It's like goodwill. Well, this one guy was an engineer working for a major contractor whose name I won't mention, and he had some information to pass on to me, and he said, I'll give you some more if I have any, but you do great work. I've been a client of yours for 3 years, and I hope to come back if I can just find a job. And I said, well, maybe 6 months later you'll be able to find a job. I want to give you 6 months free login for the password and username. Well, he just signed up a few days ago and said, I'm very grateful for what he called a severance extension for the login to the newsletter. And he found a way to pay me for the 6 months that I gave him for free. I'd never asked for it. What a nice gesture. We found a way for him to do it. I don't want to talk about how. It's not illegal, just a clever way of sending an extra $110. Very nice fellow, very nice compliment, and a wonderful gesture to pay me for a gift that I gave him. I said, not necessary. And he said, no, I want to do this. I want to do that. I said, okay, here are 2 or 3 ways you can do it. And he found one, and it's done. That was a nice thing to do. Those kind of things keep me going. Anyway, got to go.